Poker was originally invented in France and Germany, but of course, it owes its worldwide popularity mostly to the United States. Poker came back to Europe about 35 years ago, at a time when Quiz Moneymaker had just been introduced to grammar school and people around the world were anxiously awaiting a new film called The Return of the Jedi. The gateway to Europe for poker was not, as you might think, the United Kingdom, but its disobedient neighbor to the west, Ireland, the country that invented metal pipes, the White House, and Halloween. It's the only country that has a musical instrument on their flag, which at least is friendlier than Mozambique with their AK-47, and a rather unusual tradition to hold birthday children upside down and bump their heads on the ground as many times as they are years old. Padraig Parkinson is 58. He's a poker icon in Ireland, and he was there when poker touched down in Europe, or to be more precise, at the Killiney Castle Hotel in Dublin, where poker club owner Terry Rogers had invited the American superstars for a couple of tournaments and a week of cash games.
Terry Rogers was probably the biggest innovator in the whole history of poker. He went to America, befriended Benny Binion, decided to bring poker to Ireland in a big way, way before everybody and anybody in Europe ever thought about it. And Terry wasn't happy with starting the Eccentrics Club and having the first couple of Irish Opens there. Terry wanted to go big time before anybody else in Europe ever figured out what was going on. So Terry brought them here to the Killiney, the iconic Killiney Castle Hotel. He brought the biggest names in the world here. He brought Stu Ungar, who had to get a passport to come, Doyle Brunson, Amarillo Slim, Chip Reese, Perry Green, you name it. All the biggest names in the world were here. Like, this is like 1982. I mean, nobody in Europe was even playing Texas Hold'em, and Terry had them all over here. I think the world champion at the time was Tom McEvoy. Terry brought him over, and Tom won the tournament. But they had a whole week here of cash games and 5 or 6 tournaments. And it was the first time the Americans had ever left home. And it took Terry Rogers to do it, to bring them here and to bring them to Ireland.
Texas Hold'em was unknown in Europe at the time, and so was Noahfurlong, who would later win the WSOP main event in 1999. But in 1983 he was more interested in horses and dogs, especially his own dog.
Well, you know, the tiniest things can change a guy's life. And the day Noahfurlong decided, and the exact time he decided to walk his dog just outside the hotel here, certainly changed his and mine. Noel was walking his dog up just outside the hotel, and I saw his friend Terry Rogers in the driveway. So he came in to say hello to Terry. Terry told him that what was going on, that all the biggest poker players in the world were here. Now, Noel wasn't a big poker player at the time, but he had played 7-stud and 5-card draw. But Noel was maybe the biggest gambler in Ireland on horses and dogs and that. But no, Noel would have bet on anything. So Noel brought the dog home, came back in here, and 2 hours later, he's playing this newfangled game he'd never heard of, Texas Hold'em, with Puggy Pearson, of all people. And Puggy is winding him up, but Noel is winning the money. I think he told me he won 8,000 from Puggy playing him heads up, and that kind of got him hooked on playing Texas Hold'em. And Noel went on to win 2 Irish titles, and then 17 years later, he was crowned champion of the world in the main event in Las Vegas, and all because he decided to walk his dog on Killiney Hill.
At the time, Dublin also had a small poker club called the Eccentrics Club. It had a tiny player pool, but produced amazingly successful players.
Yeah, Terry Rogers was also the owner of the Eccentrics Club, and it was probably the most appropriately named club in the world, because the secretary couldn't type, the cashier couldn't look after his own money, let alone everybody else's, but it worked. And they played poker in there really wild. People came from all over Ireland to do it, but you know, the poker community in Ireland was very small at the time. So, you know, on a Tuesday night in the Eccentrics Club, when I started to play there might have been only maybe 3 tables. going up to 5 or 6 tables when the Irish Open was on. And, everybody was there for the crack more than anything else. And it seemed like everybody was having fun, but they must have been doing something right there, because amazingly, that small little club over on the north side of Dublin produced 5 final tablists at the main event of poker. From maybe a pool of maybe 30 players. There was Donnacha was the first. He led the way for us. Then in '99, Noahfurlong won it. I managed to fluke my way onto the final table. George McEvoy finished 7th. And just to prove the whole thing wasn't a fluke, in 2002, Scott Gray finished 4th in the main event. But that was out of one small little club, which was just, it wasn't even a club. There was a shop on Hanlon's Corner over on the north side of Dublin, just around the corner from a pub. And there was 2 sort of not very classy apartments knocked together to make a gambling club, with 5 or 6 tables in it. And 5 guys came out of there, went to Vegas, somehow or other punched above their weight, and nailed the world championship between them.
So 5 players of the Eccentrics clubs made it to the WSOP final table, and one of them was Donnacha in 1983, the very year when the Americans came to Dublin. He remembers a couple of details of said poker week that were handled particularly Irish.
Well, at reception they had a big safe, so when people arrived, they sort of said to can we put our money in a safe? So the girl gave out a brown paper envelope and said, write your name on the back of it, and they put it into the safe. And that seemed to be, there was somebody on reception all the time. But then one of the American players went up, who was a very honorable sort of guy. He was from Alaska. And when he went up to get his envelope, she couldn't find it or something. And then she said, look, you come behind reception and get the envelope. So the safe door was open, and he got his envelope. But then he thought, look, I could have taken 3 or 4 envelopes. So he told me, who then either I or he told Terry. And then Terry got on to the owner of this hotel, Paddy Fitzpatrick, and said, look, your system is very bad at that safe, and there's a lot of money in there, there's $500,000 in there. So of course he immediately rang his insurers. They said, we're not covered for that sort of money. So then he told Terry he had to take all the money out of the safe. So all the players had to take their money out. So the only thing they could do then was to put it into Terry's suite. And I think Terry had maybe an unofficial couple of guards, keeping an eye on the place. So now he had to get one of them to, stay in his suite 24 hours a day. They probably did it in shifts, and with a submachine gun. So then when Terry went to bed, the guard was sitting at the end of the bed with a machine gun. So I think Terry didn't sleep very well for the rest of that week.
Yet there were actual poker battles too, and on one occasion, Donnacha almost could even have ended the career of Stu Ungar, who even today is seen as maybe the best player of all times. He was not much of a traveler though, nor were his American fellows.
Yeah, well, a lot of Americans are so insular about traveling, and quite a few of them didn't have passports, and I believe Stewie didn't either. But so when they came here, obviously Stewie was mainly more a tournament player. He was sort of a guy that in a cash game, if Stewie started to lose, he played very badly. If Stewie was winning in a cash game, you didn't really want to play with him, because he would really torture you. But I don't know why, but I must have been losing money on the trip when I challenged Stewie head up, which would obviously be his best game. But I think we played with 20,000 each, which is a lot of money in the early 80s. And I had 35, he was down to 5,000. And then he gradually got back, and then I think it seems unbelievable, head up, I had 2 aces and he had 2 kings, and he beat me in that pot. So we got back level, and then Stewie said, I'm stopping, which is like, now when I think of it, the last person I'd be trying to find is Stu Ungar.
So handling money doesn't seem to have been an area where the Irish were experts in. But surely they would learn from their mistakes, wouldn't they? Well, yes, but they did it in their own very special way.
Well, a lot of funny stuff happened that year that the Americans came over here. They must have thought the Irish were absolutely crazy. The first day, Irish icon Laramie fell asleep on the toilet when he was leading one of the tournaments because he'd been drinking brandy all day, but they decided to leave him asleep. And on the final day, the Irish surpassed themselves. On the guys who were running the cage decided to go on a dinner break, and sort of as a security measure, they thought it'd be a good idea if they took all the money with them in case somebody stole it. And as a further security measure, they decided not to come back. So when people were looking to get paid from the tournament, the cage was closed, the guys were gone, and that was the end of that. So Terry had to stomp up for the whole lot. Terry had to pay everybody, but you know, Terry was an extraordinary character. I mean, Terry liked it if somebody fucked him. I mean, and I know the worse they did it, the more he liked it. I mean, he loved when people pulled strokes on him because he could complain about them then for the rest of his life. But the Americans just didn't get it. Like, you know, just, what's happened to the cage? Well, the guys are gone. We're not sure.
And there you have it. The first poker experiment in Europe turned out to be a catastrophe. But it was this utter disaster that the Irish built the Irish Open on, which is now the most traditional, longest running poker tournament in Europe. It's still a special one too, as it features side events like sumo fatsuit wrestling, pool and beer pong. Padraig Parkinson still plays in it every year, priding himself to have lost more money in this tournament than anyone else. And Donnacha OD made the final table only last year. Meanwhile, his son Owen has carried on the tradition as he reached the November 9 in 2011. And if he ever has a grandson, is he going to carry on the legacy?
I'd say there's a very good chance of it, that it could be in the genes.